Want to welcome y'all to a podcast. My name is Stuart Guthrie.
My
Call me
name's
Stu.
Steve. My name's Steve Magadance.
There's Steve Magadance. And if you hear me refer to him as Mags, that's just kind of what we call him. So Steve and I have known each other for a long time now, 7 years. We started at the same high school as assistant principals, and now we're both principals. And we kind of wanted to start a podcast. We call it Sharing the Brain Podcast, or vlog perhaps, since we're going to use the video, I think. And I wanted Steve to explain the whole sharing the brain thing. Where'd that come from? Because we've said that for a long time,
We
you and
have.
I.
I think it was back when when we were assistant principals together. We found that a lot of the things that we were doing kind of overlapped. I think you were doing facilities for a little while. I was doing calendar, and there were just places where our work crossed paths, and we just talked a lot about, well, who's got the brain this week? Well, who's got the brain next that week? And one of us always seemed to have the brain, or lost the brain, or done something, hidden it somewhere, or given it to somebody else. And then I think once we went our separate paths, we talked about sharing it back and forth. And you have the brain this week, you have the brain that week. You're going to send it through the Pony, which is our intercampus mail kind of thing. And I think it was just about just collaborating and talking together and sharing practice and just the importance of that kind of community. I think that comes out of having work that's similar.
Yeah. And I think that's why the whole podcast idea really kind of came about. Is we just enjoyed talking about education, enjoyed talking about leadership. And, even now we'll go out on the weekends, we'll ride bikes together, go out for a soda or sweet tea perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversations kind of turn to education. It's invariable that we'll do that. And I've always enjoyed the conversations, and we thought, well, let's put together and talk about what we do, talk about leadership, talk about education. And I think that's how we got the idea for the podcast. 7 years in the making. And I did have a thought that I was going to call this episode 101, because we've had at least 100 conversations, and you sound a little more established if your first episode is 101 and not just the first one. So you're welcome to episode 101 of Sharing the Brain podcast. Stu Guthrie and Steve Magadance.
Right.
So Max, what's on your mind? What's been going on with you?
Summer. Summer is an interesting time. I think that a lot of times we think about summer as being the time that schools close, and that's true. Students do go home for the summer break. Teachers go home and they have a bit of time to themselves. But the life of the principal seems to continue on past the time when students go home. It's hiring season. It is thinking about next year's season already. And I think that's the lovely thing. Hey, Lolly, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, Lolly. That's my baby. This is my favorite. We have 3 Dalmatians, and this one's my favorite. She won't leave me alone. But get back to Steve about the whole summer thing, because you're right. School never really stops for us, does it?
It doesn't that way. I mean, the day-to-day instruction and the day-to-day running of a campus, that slows down considerably, right? I mean, custodians have some time, but I was just thinking about like the time that you have to think and dream. It's really on high gear when you're in the summer months, right? You get a chance to do some of that imaginating and some of that, conversing with colleagues, thinking about what worked, what you want to improve on. And so, I mean, I like the time of it. It's almost like you take a sigh, you just take all right, now let's take stock of where we are. And that's kind of the thing that's on my mind, is taking stock. I mean, I just finished my 3rd year as a principal. So you feel like you're set in the ways is not the right term, but you feel like you're comfortable in the way things are moving, at the pace they're moving. And now it's time to think about, what's working and what do you refine. That's kind of been what's on my mind in the biggest sense. What's on your mind?
Well, I think the same thing. I started in January as a principal, and I've spent the last 5 months at my new school just taking notes, watching, trying to be around, trying to see what's going on. And then, honestly, I had a stack of notes. I had a folder probably an inch thick, and I started making I don't say graphic organizer, or just really kind of a drawing I put on the back of the door of my office, and just started laying out things. Just try to use, start with some data, try to see what the numbers are saying, hear what your teachers are saying. And then, like you said, this time of the year, it lends itself to kind of like what I think of as like big thoughts. When we get around to August, I want to have a bit more specifics to deal with. How are we going to do this? What's our timeline? What's our agenda? All that kind of a thing. But I think this time of the year is really about the big thoughts, the big ideas. What if we did this? Why don't we do this? And that's where I've been. And plus a little decompressing. You know, I had been an assistant principal for a long time, 10 years in the district we're in. And then I had been a principal, but that was a long time before in a much different setting. It was a private school setting. So just being able to decompress a little bit's been nice too. So I know you have plans. You were going to go to New York City. Might have kind of fallen through for the same. Are you all still planning on taking a trip to New
We
York?
are. We leave on the 4th of July. We're going to be in Virginia watching fireworks and then rent a car and do some of the colonial
Cool.
settlements there. And then head up to Washington, D.C., drop the car, get on trains,
I
head
love
to
it.
Philly, head to New York, head to Boston. We'll be back about mid-July. Yeah, it's going to be a great trip. Taking all four of us, me and my family, my wife, and two kids. So it'll be good.
Wow. That's excellent. Last year I did something similar. I had taken a U-Haul and driven. We're in San Antonio. I hope that somebody's watching this outside of San Antonio. That'd be kind of cool. But
We
we
hope anybody watches this, really, I think. But
there could be two viewers. Me, you, well, three. Me, you, and Lolly. Lolly's our first viewer. But
my
yeah, we
wife
drove.
might watch it. We'll see.
My wife will watch about 5 seconds of it, and then she'll say, "Oh, you look like a giant alien. Your head all washed out."
You took a
But no,
U-Haul
I
road
love New
trip.
York City. Yeah, we took a road trip. I drove a U-Haul from San Antonio to Dallas to Nashville to Washington, D.C., to New York City, and then to Connecticut. So I was a good brother-in-law for my brother-in-law last summer. But before we started recording this today, we were trying to think of what's the big why? Why do we want to talk about this? And we talked about the fact that we enjoy our conversations. But the one thing that keeps coming back to mind is about a month ago, I went to a conference, and there was a superintendent talking. He said that he always ends all of his interviews for principals with one question at the end. And the question is, what are your deepest held beliefs about education and how'd you come to get to them? And I asked Mags that question a couple weeks ago when we were out riding bikes or whatever. And his answer was similar to mine, which is, well, you have conversations. We have a conversation about this. We talk about it. We're always kind of living what those deepest held beliefs are. But my challenge is, and it may not be something we can fully flesh out in just a quick podcast here, but my question is, what can you do it in 30 seconds? You know, the old elevator speech. If you're in an elevator with the superintendent or whoever, how do you concisely explain what your deepest held beliefs about education are and how'd you come to get them? So when I asked that question, what was your answer? Do you remember how we started that conversation?
Gosh, it's like I've slept a few times between then and
Yeah.
now. I guess the big belief that just kind of sits with me is, what are we doing today that is preparing our future for tomorrow, and not just from an employment standpoint, but when I think about the kids who are walking the halls at the school where I work, they're close to the next level. They're close to post-secondary pursuits. They're close to careers. What are the tools and strategies and tasks, and what are the questions they're able to ask that are going to prepare them for whatever's next? I mean, I think some of the buzzwords that exist out there, it's 21st century literacy. The jobs of tomorrow are not yet in existence today. So the
Right.
reality is that many of these young people that are walking the halls are being prepared for a future that is not yet defined for them, right? They're not going into a factory job. They're not going into, a typical, 9 to 5 kind of gig anymore. Some
Right.
will, many won't, probably more won't at this point. The 21st century is a much different place, and the global community we know is pretty small. So as far as that big idea, that big belief, it's how are we doing what's best for kids for tomorrow?
Yeah, I agree with all that, what you're saying. And having been in a big high school, 3,000 plus kids, I saw so many kids that I think felt the pressure of the old way of thinking. And I say old, even like with my generation, when I was in high school, you were kind of expected to know what you wanted to do at 17 years old, 18 years old.
Uh-huh.
And that doesn't seem realistic to me. Even looking back on it, I had about 3 or 4 different ideas of what I wanted to do, what I wanted to pursue. And it really wasn't until I got out with my bachelor's degree 5 years later that I really started to realize, kind of where I was going to go.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's been magnified these days where, like you said, the kids are going into college this year. this coming fall, they're going to be learning things that their job may not even require them to know 5 years later. And you start talking about your deepest held beliefs. I think, we kind of go back to how we were raised, what we were taught, and those things are long gone. So it's a challenge to think of. That's why I brought that question up. What are our deepest held beliefs?
Yeah, there's another thing that I was thinking about, and you sent me something earlier this weekend. No, it was last week. I was at a conference in the state of Colorado in Denver, and it was actually a video. And this is going to be a strange connection, so pardon the tangent. You sent me a video of Dr. Tony Wagner, Harvard professor. He wrote the book, I think one of the most was Creating Innovators. He was giving a keynote address to an organization called the Asia Society, and strange stories to go through. I think I was in the audience when that was taped.
That's crazy.
Like 2010. But
that's what it was.
In that address, he was talking about education being a very isolated kind of practice, kind of profession, where about teachers in particular, they're working in a confined space that we call a classroom, and there is this idea that when that door closes, that the teacher is sort of the commander of that domain. But in reality, we know that education is required to be super collaborative, right? Like just you and I talking through ideas, through thoughts when we were together on the same campus, and even now when we're together on the weekends or even in this podcast. It's so important to be able to share practice and to make sure practice is transparent. I can remember a time where people thought practice was super private, right? Teaching is a very personal thing also, and so that in order to make practice more public, you have to be really vulnerable. So I think that the bigger picture of that is, and maybe some of the reason behind this conversation or these conversations, is that being willing and able to share your practice as a professional educator is a good pursuit for lifelong learning and for modeling. I think things you hope to see both from colleagues who are teaching in the classroom daily and from kids, right? That they're able to share what they're doing, what they're learning, and the why of it.
Well, I'll tell you, and this is kind of I segue into an old story that I know we had a former principal for both of us, and he used to stand up in front of the kids and the parents, and he would ask them, what is this? What is this? And of course, people would yell out, cell phone. He goes, no, it's a computer. Cell phone's just an app. And I remember when he first would say that, I always thought it was kind of funny. Just, okay, it's kind of true, I guess, in a way. But this actually is what I think is changing education. Because just 10 years ago, we had cell phones going back, number of years, but just maybe 6, 8, 10 at the most years ago, we were able to use our phones to access videos, and they would stream flawlessly. And right now I can get on YouTube, I could find that same video I sent you. And what I'm tying that into is how we share information. I think I probably had that video on my phone, and I just grabbed the link, sent it to you really quick. I do the same thing with the people I work with. I'll be flipping through Twitter at Mr. Guthrie Tweets. I'll be flipping through Twitter, and I'll find something. And this is kind of embarrassing. I didn't know my phone had this cool little stylus. And there's a way to just cut, and you just drag it and you cut out a picture, and I send it to the people I work with a couple of questions or just a statement. And I have to be careful with that, because I've done a couple mornings at 6 o'clock in the morning. Then I have to realize people are still sleeping, and I'm making their phone blow up. But it gets back to the idea, I think, of even like this conversation. This is how you do it. This is really where you have to share ideas and then let them trickle down, let them kind of percolate back around, and then share them back with the person you started it with. So yeah, I think that's where our education is ultimately going to end up, is that we can all access everything through our phone.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I think about that, and knowing that we had committed to a certain amount of time ahead of this, our time is nearly up for this first episode of the podcast. And I just wanted to think, and maybe I'll just throw this out there, and it's too late now, I'm going to put it in the ether.
Sure.
For whoever might end up watching this, it might be an interesting way to allow people to I don't know, tweet us at Mr. Guthrie Tweets at
Yep.
Magadance, and talk to us about what you think about the podcast. That would be super great. But maybe also talk to us about things you'd like to hear us talk about. We've got a few years of experience between us, and that by no means covers all the bases. But it could be a great opportunity to answer questions, to share thoughts, to share ideas. I think we'd also be interested in having guests on the podcast. So if
Absolutely.
you're that kind of thing or willing or interested, that would be super cool. I know that there's a group of our colleagues who are traveling now out west, and they're visiting some of the high-tech corporations out there and learning about ways to continue to use technology like this to be more efficient, to collaborate, to share ideas, and to meet. So it could be a really neat way to keep the conversation going or to start new conversations. I don't know if you have more to say about that, Stu, or.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Let's do that. And we'll share at the end, we'll put up our Twitter handles. And by all means, if you have any ideas or if you want to try to answer that question, what are your deepest held beliefs about education? How'd you come to get them? Would love to hear that as a recurring theme. And I look forward to it. It's 15 minutes. It went by quick. And I really enjoyed it, Mags. And also, the last thing, there's only one brain between us. There's more room. If you want to add your brain, bring it. We could use another brain around here. So
do you
wrap it up, Mags.
This week, by the way?
I thought you had it this week. Oh, God. That explains a lot of things about my last week at school. So, yeah, I'll go find it. I think I'll put it in a drawer at my desk, and I'll return it so you can have it next week, okay?
All right, hold on. I'm going to try to do something. So we talked about sharing. Hold on a second.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm going to try to share something I think has our Twitter handles on it. So let's see if that pops up here. Oh, that may or may not pop. Oh, wait, maybe it will pop up. Do you see something different? No.
I see your notes. I see, looks like an email I sent you.
Our Twitters. Do you see the one where I'm
Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah.
All right. So there are Twitter handles. I think those are right. Is that right?
That's it.
Sweet. Well, there's our Twitter handles. Thanks for listening, all 3 or 4 of you who did.
Come here, Lolly.
If you have questions or ideas, bring Lolly back in one more time.
All right. Yeah, that's my good girl. All right. Thank y'all for watching, listening. Make sure you participate. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Have a good summer, too.